held our start for that reason. So we'll start here in a minute.
Challenge.
For folks on the line, we're going to get started here in about 1 minute, and we're just waiting, giving members a chance to transition from one committee meeting to another. So let's give them 1 more minute, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, let's get started. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee meeting of the whole. It is October 15th at 12:06 p.m. Desiree, would you like to do the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Ms. Allard.
Here.
Mr. Constant. Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Ms. Kennedy.
Here.
Ms. LaFrance, I believe, is excused. Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Mr. Perez-Vardilla.
Here.
Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Mr. Weddleton. Ms. Zalatel.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. And just as a reminder, if you'd like to get into the queue, please put your request in chat. We're gonna go ahead and get started. The first item on our agenda is a report from the Budget Advisory Commission. Nolan, are you on, sir?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Nolan Clauda, and I am the chair of the Budget Advisory Commission. And brief update for the committee is that we had our monthly meeting last week. 2 main items of business were that we approved a resolution that we passed on to the assembly pretty quickly and in time for the Tuesday meeting. And that resolution was mainly concerning the CARES funding. We expressed our approval of the general approach that the Assembly took to allocating the CARES money, the 156 million. And we also, there had been the proposal on the table that is now enacted about allocating 10 million to small business relief, and we specifically called out that as something that we endorsed. That had been something that our committee had. That our commission had been pushing for and advocating for as it was. So we were really happy with that addition. Otherwise, we did get a pretty detailed presentation from Lance Wilbur about the proposed 2021 budget, and so a lot of good detail there. One of the things that I noted from it is, as with several budget cycles in past years, the actual budgeted amount is in real terms is actually smaller than last year's. It's it's about 1% 1% more than last year, but the inflation rate, is just under 2%. So in real terms, the municipality proposed budget is actually a little bit smaller than the 2020 budget, the Q1 revision. So I thought that was noteworthy. Our commission is, as I've updated this group before, we've taken responsibility for doing deep dives into individual departments, and so we are going to be spending a lot of time on the proposed 2021 budget and digging into it with our own departmental perspectives. I'm doing the fire departments, and we've got the major departments of the municipality represented in that. So that's going to give us a chance to give a pretty thorough review of the budget. For now, otherwise, those are the main items. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take those. But otherwise, that's my update.
Thank you, Nolan. I don't see any questions at this point. I do want to recognize that Mr. Weddleton has joined our meeting. Hold just for a second to see if any questions. Nope, it doesn't look like any questions. Thank you so much for your report. We'll move on to our next item, CARES Act funding. Who is doing that from the administration?
Through the chair, this is Alex Lifka, Chief Fiscal Officer. I'm going to ask if Jason has anything to say before. I was just going to walk through where we are in spending the money. Jason, did you want to say anything? Hearing nothing. It's 75 days till December 30th, and the singular focus of finance and many others is to make sure that we spend all of the $156 million that has been allocated. As of the end of September, we are roughly at 70 million spent. And just as a reminder, we need to get to 93 million before we can ask for the next tranche of money from the state. And to remind people, we got 116 million up front, and there are 2 more payments of 20 million that we can get once we have spent 80% of what we've already received. Just to give people an idea of where we are, and well, we probably spent a lot of this money, but it hasn't functionally made it back into the accounting system. Rental and mortgage assistance, we've allocated 15 million. As of the date of this report, we'd only spent 3, so we've got a lot more to spend. Nonprofit stimulus, 3 million. As of this report, we hadn't credited any. Hospitality support, we've budgeted 7 million. We've only spent 1.5, so it's another 5.5 there. So we've got a long way to go, but I believe, can get there fairly quickly. I think we have an aggressive goal to make sure that all the programs are up and running and before the end of October, so that hopefully in early November we can request that second tranche of money. And I will stop there.
Great. I don't see any questions for you at this point.
No.
Let's move.
Yeah.
Looks like
Weddleton.
no. John, did you have a question you wanted to ask Mr. Webster?
Yeah, I'd like to see, find out if there's some way we can make it crystal clear for anyone to go and look at each of the little line items that we've allocated and see the dollar amount and where it is in the process, and if it's got someone, Callin Housing or whoever it is who's taking applications, a quick link. But it's a question we get is who, what, when, where, and if it's not ready yet, say still in process or something. But I have not found anywhere on the administration or the assembly website where it's really clear.
We've got most of that information. It's in some very large spreadsheets, but I will do my best to consolidate it down and provide it to the assembly next week and see if we can post it somewhere so people can know what we're doing.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you. And I have another question from Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I have 2 questions. One is, I guess I need clarification on the idea of what it means to spend something, because I was under the assumption that once we had allocated it into a grant fund, in other words, like the childcare bucket, that we had considered, it was considered spent at that point. So it sounds to me like, though, unless actually all that money out of that account has actually been distributed, it is not considered to be spent yet. So can you just clarify that for me, please? And then I've got another question. Thanks.
Certainly. And looking to Treasury Guidance, the cost and expenditure is considered to have occurred when the recipient has expended the funds. So for our purposes, I mean, to the extent possible, for rental relief, for example, you know, you've allocated money to rental relief. We're turning around and working through a partner to get that money to the landlord and or the tenant. It's once that money has actually been sent by the partner agency to the recipient, can we consider it spent, and that we can report it back to the state that we have spent it. So it's not enough for us to have said, we've set aside 10 million. We actually have to have sent that money to the child care providers and for it to count.
Okay, thank you. And then just kind of a follow-up on that then. So that's actually a lot of tracking that we have to do as well. It's not just basically saying, here's the money. We have to actually check with those people to say you've actually spent the money the way we were intending you to spend it. So we have to do some follow-up on that.
That's correct, and of course that's what ultimately we need to certify to the state, and through the state to the federal government. And we'll use child care as an example. So we have to have sent the money to the child care providers. They should spend the money. I'm not sure that it's on us to make sure that they have actually spent the money. I think they have to certify back to us that they have. You know, it's the same thing with a lot of the small business stuff. We're going to send them money, and they have to certify back to us that they have spent it. Yes, there's a fair amount of data tracking involved, but we understand that.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. I didn't realize it was quite that lengthy of a process, so I appreciate that. Mr. Chair, can I ask one more question then?
Yep, go right ahead.
Thank you. My other question, since we're talking about childcare, is actually about childcare and the money that we most recently allocated for childcare. I think that most recent amount was $5 million, and it was actually an amount, I believe it was in the fund balance column once we did the shifting of the sources for the payroll cost, or the payroll COVID funding that went to payroll and then left us the fund balance available. So my understanding, though, is that $5 million that we designated for childcare, you may be having a hard time being able to actually expend those funds. So potentially that money could be available just in just for fund balance purposes. And I'm assuming at that point there is no COVID funding tracking required of that particular fund, because we actually, or that particular amount of money, because we took it out of the fund balance. So is that then, would we be able then to redesignate that $5 million that we were going to give to childcare, and it would actually become available for other potential fund balance uses? Can you speak to that a bit, or am I just totally off track on that, the idea of that $5 million not really being able to be spent for childcare at this point? Thanks.
And I may defer to Lance to add to this, but you are correct that the amount of revenue in we'll call it the general fund as opposed to fund balance, just for discussion purposes, the amount of revenue in the general fund that's being freed up due to the fact that we are spending CARES grants as allowed on first responder salaries those and the programs that got moved to the general fund for that purpose, which you're correct, do include the $5 million for childcare assistance. There is no, December 30 requirement that be spent. The reallocation aspect of that, I think, is more of a budgeting purpose from the standpoint that we budgeted it for 2020, and I would defer to Lance in terms of what, if anything, could be done or needed to be done in December should we reach a point where we don't believe we can spend the money by the end of the year.
Through the chair, this is Lance. Alex is correct. I think at the end, Assemblymember Kennedy, if we programmed, if the intention was to spend $5 million on childcare for the purposes of, responding to COVID, and at the end the childcare program can't do it, I think it's a policy call on whether that $5 million gets reallocated to some of the other programs that the Assembly administration identified to address the impacts of COVID, or does it just go into fund balance and be applied for some other purpose at some other date? It's not required to go to those programs that you identified in COVID, and it's not required to automatically stay in fund balance. Hopefully that the need for childcare support is there. If the problem is just a timing and not a need, obviously the $5 million will continue to address the need, and putting it and having it available in the fund balance will basically remove the restriction of the clock, allow us to help those businesses and those families that need childcare assistance.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Wilbur and Mr. Slivka. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We have one more question before we move on to the next item. Ms. Zalato.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I noticed when we did the $10 million appropriation on Tuesday night, there seemed to be some confusion because that it was still a CARES Act funding item because of the fund balance designation. Is there anything we can do to make that more clear that it was CARES Act money that's been moved into fund balance when we do those fund certifications, just so that we can be crystal clear that it was this particular kind of pot of money or color of money, whichever way we want to put it, but it happens to be sitting there in fund balance because of the first responder payroll move we did.
Through the chair, this is Alex Slivka. So just for correction purposes, we are not actually moving money from the CARES grant into the general fund. What we are doing is we are moving expenses that would have been incurred in the general fund into the CARES grant because they are eligible. And what that does is that frees up tax revenue that would have otherwise been spent on those expenses. So it's, as Lance is fond of saying, we've just changed the color of the money that we're using to pay for it. I'm not sure if we can do what you're asking other than just to have people understand, why we are able to make these expenditures. And it is directly related to the fact that of how we are utilizing the CARES grants in accordance with what the Treasury Department has directed us.
Ms. Zalato, did that answer your question? Do you have a follow-up?
Thank you. I'm good.
Okay, thanks. All right, we're going to move on to the next item, an update on the 2020 budget. Lance, do you want to take it?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Lance Wilbur, Office of Management Budget. So on Tuesday night, we gave you our latest budget to actuals report through the end of August. I'll just summarize it in case you didn't get a chance to review it. So at the end of August, we were about 67% through the year. And at that point in time, the total amount of our budget spent, labor and non-labor, was at about 56.5%. So we're on a projection for underspending, at least at that point in time. If you take the amount that we have spent And then we set aside money, we call it encumbered. We set it aside for known expenses that have yet to occur. So we know they're coming. So if we take what we spend and we know what's coming, we're at about 60% of our total budget. So the departments are doing overall, we are on a projection for all of the departments. It looks like they are, we're going to be in total underspent, at least right now in this projection. The September or the end of the third quarter close will be coming very soon. So as those numbers come together, we will be giving you an updated report at the end of the third quarter. That will also include the work from the utilities. But while in total we are doing well, there's a couple things I just want to point out. Again, that's the total amount. On the labor side, we are about 64% spent. So again, a little bit under. And then on our non-labor side, both spend and encumbered, we're at about 58%. So that's a good place to be as we are going into the last 3 months of the years on our expenditures. The other thing that we have to report every month is our overtime. And while the labor budget includes the overtime, we got some departments, and many of them are probably not going to be a surprise, that are running a little bit of overtime. And those reports are available there. It's just due to seasonality and some of the other things. So that's on the third or fourth page of your report. And there's a report on travel. Obviously, that one's going to be pretty low because we took away the travel budgets for 2020. So if you get a chance to take a look at that report, if you have any questions, please let me know. The cover page, what we do is we highlight those departments that if they are 5% above where they should be or 5% below where they should be, we put a little bit of narrative in there. You'll see some narrative. They're all because they're below 5% below that 67%. The only one that's above that has to do with some non-labor stuff in the municipal manager's department, and that's just due to some year-end costs for self-insurance. So we are working on a year-end projection. That budget to actual information just tells us where we are at a point in time. In September will give us some really good information on the spend as well. So right now, the only departments I'm a little concerned about as individuals, they're going to be running a little bit over, is the fire department is going to be very close. I think Chief Hetrick's doing a really good job trying to manage that. Chief Dahl, I know that they're going to be running into a little bit of over expense. I think most of it has to do with their non-labor, and I think the health department, but I think that's going to get rectified because much of their over expenditures are related to costs that need to be moved into COVID FEMA, I think, an account. So keeping an eye on those three, but overall it's looking at the end of the year that we will be underspent, but we still need to account for some significant cash in leave by a couple departments that occurred in the middle of September. So our September budget to actuals probably be a little bit more telling, a little bit more better information on how we're going to end the year. So that's what I have on 2020. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, unless there's questions. I can't hear you, Cameron.
There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you for that update. Why don't you just continue on and do an update for the 2021?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the impacts on COVID, basically some of the underspending, and then I think Mr. Morris talked about the revenue side of the house. He may add a little bit to that in Alex's report. Okay. So in 2021,
well, thanks.
Yes. So on 2021,
go ahead.
The overview that we provided last week, thank you for your attention. I appreciate that. I have looking forward to getting into the details tomorrow for the 2020 budget overview with departments. I sent a schedule to the department heads, and I believe those schedules got sent to the assembly members. If you didn't receive it, I'll coordinate with Desiree. But we're on from 11 to 4, so it's a 5-hour stretch. We're going to start with public safety and then the larger direct service departments, so many of those that report to Mr. Falsey. What I'm going to do in the presentation is for those 4 departments that are going to be receiving alcohol tax dollars, so parks, library, a little bit for Treasury, and predominantly health. Once we get through the general government discussions on their operating budget, and if they have a capital, I'm going to add a slide in there. We can talk about which of those departments will be being proposed for alcohol tax. And so we'll spend a little bit of time talking that. And I think at the end of all of those presentations, if there's still additional questions about the alcohol tax, the Assembly can then consider whether or not they need more information or you would like something different. So the times I put on there are been adjusted. I know last year we were running a little bit over, so I tried to make the adjustments based on our experience from last year. So I look forward to having the discussion tomorrow. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't see any additional questions at this point. So we're going to move. Go ahead.
Let me just add one thing I forgot. I'm going to send the presentation for tomorrow to Desiree probably in the next couple hours here. So she'll get that out and everyone will have a chance to look at it prior to tomorrow at 11. Thank you.
Okay. Great. All right. It doesn't look like, again, there's no questions or comments at this point. Let's move forward. Alex, do you want to do an MOA financial status update?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask Treasurer Dan Moore to provide an update on monthly revenues. And Dan, if you're talking, we can't hear you. And if Mr. Moore is not available, then I will provide the update. And this is on data through October 14th. And I think as you've been aware from month to month, we have been running a deficit and we expect by the end of the year to have a deficit of revenue. It had been roughly about $18 million. We have updated it for this month to project a deficit of $21 million. The largest change there was that we had been assuming that community assistance, which had been in the budget at $4.2 million, I believe, that we had been assuming that we might get it. I think we finally decided that no, probably not. The Assembly's not going to do anything. So we took that out. Actually, I apologize. That's not why.
Alex, I'm here. This is Dan Moore. I could not find my mute button, so I apologize.
Okay, sorry. I'll let Dan correct me because I was going down the wrong.
Yeah, so Alex is right. The overall variance as of the current period is $21.2 million. It's $3 million worse. The reason for that, and Alex was starting to get into this, municipal assistance, we haven't touched that yet. It just recently got posted by the state. And because of all this CARES money, we're kind of treating that specially this year, at least for the time being. But the big change, the big $3 million change from last month to this month is in the ambulance service fees. And I believe OMB has previously briefed the Assembly on this, I think at the last work session. There is a timing issue going on with a what they call supplemental emergency medical transport program. And originally it was thought money would come in late in 2020, but it's pretty apparent at this point that it will not come in 2020. So as a result of that, there will be a little over a $3 million variance. Just in total summary, as I stated in the prior month's committee meeting, 85% of the overall variance relates very much to COVID. So it's, the biggest portion, of course, is 2/3 of it is room tax, rental vehicle tax. The other areas that are very much COVID related are motor fuel tax, parks rec fees, transit fees, library fees, and health fees. Everything else that is not part of that COVID variance, the other 15%, would be sort of in the category of more normal variance. And we do have an overall positive in terms of normal variance with respect to a few different taxes that we have. The biggest one is in marijuana tax. So right now, and we continue to update this each month, the marijuana tax has improved another $200,000. So for this year, that particular tax is expected to be $900,000 over what was budgeted. So that is a positive variance that we're expecting to have. And really on the negative variance side, the biggest one month to month has been in investment earnings. And it turns out that between last month and this month, the variance was actually quite small. It was only less than $100,000 for general government. It will continue to swing a lot month to month, so we don't know how we'll end up for the year. But the biggest negative variance in sort of normal non-COVID type revenues is in that ambulance transport program that is a timing issue. So that's the report I have. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take those.
Thank you. It again doesn't look like we have questions. Mr. Slivka, do you have additional updates on MOA financial status?
I don't think so. Other than that, the MOA is in good financial status, and I'll stop there.
Okay, great. There's a line here specifically, and I know you addressed this earlier in terms of impacts, revenue impacts to COVID-19. You feel like you covered that, yes?
I believe so. I think Mr. Moore covered that in depth.
Okay. Great. Okay, thanks. All right, with no questions in the chat, I'm going to move us forward to our next item, and that's an update on pay audits. Susie Marshall, are you on?
I sure am. Thank you.
All right, go for it.
All right. So just a reminder, the payroll audits, the goal is to review all payroll corrections submitted since we went live with SAP. And what we're doing then is we're double checking that the payroll correction was completed without error and to provide the employees and the unions with the completed audit per person. So that's the task that we're getting a status on. And the new number, we've completed 434 audits. We're 60 more than the last time I reported. We are basically, the process is legal prioritizes legal and labor, prioritize who we perform audits on. We work on understanding all those requirements of those audits, and then we just get to the work. So right now we are working on the local 367. There's 77 audits we're working on in that regard. So just, I don't know if there's any questions on that, or if you guys still, I guess the question I have for you is, do you still want us to continue to report this? Is this useful information for you guys?
Well, this is Mr. Presverty. I mean, I will say personally it is for me, but I'd love to hear from other members to see if they feel like that it's still important for them to hear updates from you on this. Do other members want to speak as to whether they think this is important to continue? Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From my perspective, I think it would be beneficial to get updates if there are any type of red flags. That's particularly what and I think the members would want to know. That way we can get an update, understand any issues that may be brought up, because some of the bargaining units come talk to assembly members directly about some of these issues, and so if we can talk about it in this form, I think that would be helpful.
Thank you. And just to add to that, are there red flags that you'd like to bring up for us now, Susie? Are there areas that we need to be aware of?
I do tell you that we are averaging per pay cycle. So, like 2,500, how many employees? 2,800. We're averaging 22 pay corrections per pay cycle, which before we went to SAP, we were averaging 50. So I think we've definitely improved our processes. We have fixed any system errors that were causing, any system problems that were causing payroll errors. We have definitely come up with better processes to work with the labor agreements and the labor unions to make sure that everything we are doing reflects the latest bargaining agreements. So we have really kind of stepped up how we're all working together. So right now, I don't see any red flags.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Weddleton, you have a question?
Sorry, was that
I
me?
think you're on mute, Mr. Weddleton. Yep.
Oh, I like getting the reports, especially if they're very brief like this. It's kind of quick. You got the key points on.
Thanks. Yeah, so it sounds like that we would like to continue to get the reports and specifically in the reports if there are areas that we need to be aware of, red flags or areas of concern, that would be really helpful in the future.
Got it.
Susie, anything else from you on update on pay audits?
No, thank you. End report.
Okay, thanks so much. All right, we're gonna go on to our next item. Any other business? Are there other items that that the administration needs to add, or members? Are there items that we left off the agenda that we'd like to address? All right, seeing none. We'll move down into the next ones. These are often standing items, but are legislative priorities and or budget items for 2021. Are there members who'd like to speak on either one of those two, legislative priorities or budget items for 2021? Anything from either the administration or members? Looks like something from Ms. Zolotel. Yes, Ms. Zolotel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe it was yesterday's meeting with the Matsu Borough, and we talked about the possibility of joint resolutions on school bond debt reimbursement. I'm wondering if that's something this committee could spearhead.
I think it's a good idea. I'll add that. I'll add that to my agenda to speak with the chair and the administration about. Thank you. Other items from the body that we need to speak about, legislative priorities or other items for this committee? All right, we're going to move on to audience participation. If there are members of the public who would like to speak during this period of time, 3 minutes, and I'll set a little timer so that you can hear a ding when you know your time is up, and we'll just do first come, first serve. Are there members of the public who'd like to speak? Go ahead and take yourself off of mute. And I believe remind me, what is the key that they need to put, Desiree, to take themselves off of mute?
*6.
*6. Thanks. That's what I thought. Okay, so you need to just put *6 and you can speak. Would anybody like to participate from the public? Now's your time. All right. Desiree, are you able to see if there's any folks on from the public?
I do see 3 call-in numbers, but I can't say whether they're public or maybe administration folks.
Great. Okay. All right. Going once, going twice. I love efficient meetings. That's great. All right. Before we close, any final comments from members? Any members of the assembly won't want to share any final comments, but before we close our meeting for today?
I move to adjourn.
Second. Great. Thanks very much. All right.
Thank you.
This meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody. See you at the next meeting.
Thanks.